à tous. Merci de votre participation. Pour écouter notre session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour, habari za leo. My name is Kevin Mutia.
Solofina Nekesa.
Lauren Arnza.
Ryan Fisher, Professional Officer at ICLE Africa. On behalf of ICLE Africa, the African Center for Cities, our future cities, and partners, I'm excited to welcome all of you to the Rise Africa 2021 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing as a platform of thinkers, doers, enablers, committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
Rise Africa is about building active networks across academia, government, private sector, civil society, and the arts.
Our entry point is based not on articulating problems followed by proposing solutions, but rather on celebrating our cities as places of innovation and culture, while asking what more we can do to make them sustainable, inclusive, and vibrant.
This festival is hosting 46 sessions over 5 days from across 16 countries in Africa and the world. Every session aims to share new ideas, showcase ongoing actions, and launch new initiatives by bringing participants together to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you to commit to one or more specific actions that you or your organizations will take on. As this session closes, you will be redirected to a survey in which you can articulate these actions. We will follow up on this committed action throughout the year and offer resources, connections, and support. In this way, we are testing the idea that events can galvanize action, and we hope that you will join us in this effort.
Beyond this session, there are many ways to take part in the festival.
Register for further sessions.
Vote for your favorites in the photo competition.
Test your knowledge of African cities from our daily quiz.
Watch a variety of inspiring video provocations.
And listen and dance to the Rise Africa 2021 playlist.
We hope that you will make all attempts to reach out to new people and build lasting connections.
Before we begin, it's important to note that this session is being recorded and that by participating, you are consenting to be recorded. All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities. So we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
To my future children, I bequeath this continent, borders lowered and turned into a soft pile of dust, smooth sand under steady feet. Your birthright is a country of flowers, a city that holds you even with your complicated lineage, the way this city has held my heart, held its arms out for all of the lost people who found solace in it. Your heirloom is this land and all its wormholes, portals hidden in plain sight between city skyscrapers, where people from here resemble people from far away places, and differences are muted while life happens. I reimagine you a country that does not cage its doves, a bequest of waters that pool precious histories, mountains that stand guard to protect against the unknown, a nation who preserves compassion over everything else, a mouth that can hum many languages, and a spirit that rises above its fears.
Hello everyone, welcome from wherever you're dialing in from. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Rise Africa session. It is titled, Building the Future Now, how our cities are pushing the boundaries of planning, governance, finance, and technology. My name is Solofina Nekesa. I'm a professional officer for urban systems at ICLE Africa. So this session was imagined as one that will explore the building blocks for our cities. And these are not just any cities, but the kind of cities that are equitable and sustainable, and the kind of cities that we aspire to live and to thrive in. So this session will also further highlight the different initiatives and projects underway by our local governments and the different city stakeholders, as well as look into the opportunities in the cities, more especially emphasizing the importance of planning, of good governance, accessible finance, and technology as the key enablers shaping our cities. So with these few opening remarks, I would like to hand over the session to our facilitator, Jess Kavonik, who is a professional officer in climate change, energy, and resilience at ICLEI Africa. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Solo. And good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to all, depending on where you are joining from. Once again, I want to welcome you to the session, Building the Future Now, how our cities are pushing the boundaries of planning, governance, finance, and technology. As Solo mentioned, my name is Jess Kamenik, and I'm a senior officer at ICLEI Africa, and it's my absolute pleasure to be the moderator for today. We'll be following a very informal setup for our session. We'll begin with a keynote address through which the lens of green finance showcases the current landscape in African cities and weaves together governance and technology references. We'll then move on to 3 case studies of Africa. The first is focusing on smart cities, the next on greenhouse gas reduction, and the third on localizing SDGs. Finally, we offer training on what is being titled the Bankability Scorecard, a tool that helps local governments assess their pilot project ideas and ensures that they are viable from a governance, finance, and technology perspective. Question and answers will occur throughout the session, so please do post any questions you have in the chat. And if possible, please can you also let us know which speaker you are addressing your question to. Please also note that there is interpretation in the session, so at the bottom of your screen, select the language that you wish to listen through. And so without further ado, I want to introduce to you our key session speakers. Today, we are honored to be joined by Carla Rusma, Director of Alina Advisory, Kung Yun Lee, Secretary General of WeGo, which stands for World Smart Sustainable Cities Organization, Brenda Strachan, she's the Manager of Spatial and Environmental Planning at the city of Mfultuzi in South Africa, and finally, Patrick Masuka, who is the Deputy Director of the Strategy Management and Business Development at the Kampala Capital City Authority, which is based in Uganda. So it is now with pleasure that I hand over to our keynote address, Carla Rusma. Carla, please can you unmute yourself, put your video on, and share your slides. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Jess, and welcome everyone to this session. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. So I'm going to talk to you today with the finance, and in particular a green finance or climate finance lens, about looking at the kind of trends that I'm currently seeing in the climate finance space, referencing a specific program that I've worked on in South Africa and that is still ongoing, that really demonstrates how climate finance can be accessed by local governments, but noting that it needs to happen through some kind of aggregation process. And then just also unpack a little bit what is meant by things like blended finance and aggregation. So the first point here really is that it's quite important to note that there's a real convergence currently happening between what has been known traditionally as climate finance and commercial finance. And this means that more and more pure commercial lenders like standard banks and the first rounds that are funding a lot of projects in Africa no longer want to fund projects that are seen to be climate unfriendly. And more these commercial funders and their credit committees want to see how SDGs and other impact measures are being incorporated, and they want to see that the projects that are being funded meet certain criteria. So that's obviously great news for the funding of projects that have real impact, and especially climate impact, as more and more money is being directed in that direction. But it's obviously very important then to have well-structured projects that meet the requirements of these funders. I also want to note that DFIs obviously have the same criteria and even more so, but it's just really interesting to see how the commercial funders are also moving in this direction. And it's, you know, one of the very clear indicators of this has been how no one essentially wants to fund coal-powered projects in the South African space anymore. Blended finance, this is a term I'm sure a lot of you have heard. It's a bit of a buzzword. It's used, it's favored by development finance institutions and climate funds. But what does it really mean? It means we're blending a combination of things like grants, concessionary debt, commercial debt, and guarantees. So moving away from a structure where pure grants were given to, say, local governments to implement projects, and saying, no, we need to do better. We need to use the grants more effectively to unlock other forms of funding like concessionary debt and commercial debt, as opposed to just using grants. So trying to do more with the limited amount of grants that are out there. Aggregation, this is a really important topic when it comes to unlocking climate projects, and especially climate finance from institutions like the Green Climate Fund or the NAMA facility. The opportunities really are twofold. So for non-bankable local governments, it's really important to be part of a larger nationally led program that can access climate finance. And for bankable local governments, there's a need to aggregate projects to achieve the sort of scale that will be interesting to DFIs. And the sort of scale we're talking about here is upwards of $10 million of financing that needs to be provided. Another key benefit of aggregation programs is that it allows for economies of scale. And you're all aware that project development is really expensive, and to try and appoint skilled transaction advisors and consultants on an individual project by project basis really is too expensive. And it's by aggregating a number of projects, similar projects, one can achieve economies of scale by using same consultants across a number of projects. Cost neutrality, very key at the moment in this COVID environment. Seeing that on a number of projects we've been working, including one where ICLEI Africa has been trying to unlock financing for a material recovery facility. We have to be conscious of the fact that our local governments are under immense pressure from a budgeting perspective. CapEx grants and intergovernmental transfers are limited, so we have to try and structure the sort of projects that can be cost neutral to governments. So just looking at this concept of blended finance and a viability gap. So I want to just quickly talk through how this works in practice. So this slide tries to demonstrate the cash flows of a project over its life. So you'll see here the green is revenue. Then you have the capital expenditure, operational expenditure over the life of the project, and funding costs and equity returns, assuming that there's some private sector involvement. The viability gap is really where revenue is less than the total costs and return requirements of the project. So there are two ways to close this gap using blended finance. The first is you can use risk mitigation measures that reduce the equity investors' return requirements and the debt providers' interest rates because it's reducing their risk. The other blended finance solution, which makes use of things like grants, concessionary loans, can be used to actually reduce the funding costs through interest rate subsidies, or to actually reduce the amount of debt that needs to be raised, closing that gap and therefore making the project affordable to local governments and ultimately bankable. I want to quickly talk you through a South African program that I've been involved in, and that maybe illustrates quite nicely how these things come together. This is the waste diversion program that South Africa launched a few years ago. The problem that it sought to address was to really help local governments that weren't meeting their waste diversion targets, and noting especially that a lot of organic waste is going into landfills in South Africa as well as recyclables, and to say how, what interventions can be put in place and how can they be funded to avoid these very harmful things going into landfills. But at the same time, solid waste management budgets at most local governments are under a lot of pressure and are often not prioritized. And then the last problem statement really is that alternative waste treatment technologies tend to be more expensive to implement than landfilling in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is because there are none of the kind of landfill taxes that have been implemented successfully in Europe and other developed countries that try and make projects more cost reflective. The solution was that South Africa's Department of Environmental Affairs developed this program in partnership with GIZ, and it sought to unlock funding for waste diversion interventions at 30 to 40 municipalities in South Africa. It put together a big funding application to the GCF, which initially unlocked PPF money and ultimately grants and concessionary loans. It also contributes to South Africa's climate commitments. And the program makes use of publicly owned infrastructure where the local governments act as a borrower or recipient of grants, but ultimately the infrastructure is operated by the private sector, who's deemed to be best placed to operate and build a market for the products. So this is just an illustration of the funding model. Central to this is local government, who contracts via a service level agreement with the private sector. The GCF, via the South Africa's Development Bank, provides grants and concessionary loans, and National Treasury also provides co-financing in the form of grants. So the majority of CapEx will be financed by the GCF via either grants or a combination of grants and concessionary loans. Local governments are responsible for making service level agreement payments to the private sector for most of the projects. And then the concept is that the landfilling budgets are ring-fenced or repurposed to pay for the SLA payments, making the project cost neutral to the local governments. The lessons learned here were that climate grants and concessionary debt can be used to make these type of projects affordable to local governments, but aggregation is key in order to access these forms of funding. In this instance, a PPP wasn't justified because of the size of the CapEx involved and the risk transfer required. But significant levels of grant funding are required due to the relatively low perceived cost of landfilling in South Africa. The local government process will treat the landfill construction costs, and also because local governments treat landfill construction costs as sunk costs and therefore don't really recognize the full cost of landfilling or the true cost, and also the lack of really cost-reflective landfill tariffs. So this has been quite a lengthy process. It's taken about 3 to 4 years. It's currently in its final stages, where the project preparation funding that was received from the GCF is being used to design the final program. But it's quite a kind of a new concept in that it's going to unlock funding for 30 to 40 municipalities. And then just largely thinking around how do we scale things up? Again, this point around bankable local governments really need to aggregate a number of projects to achieve the sort of funding ticket size that DFIs will be interested in and be able to support. Aggregation programs really important to unlock funding for non-bankable municipalities, in other words, bankable municipalities that can't access financing that easily themselves. Digital tools are very important in ensuring that there can be some sort of peer-to-peer exchanges between local governments to identify needs and to also lobby national governments to structure the aggregation programs that are required to meet local governments' needs. Digital platforms are also essential to give local governments access to the enabling tools they need. Financing models, how to toolkit, standardized contracts, etc. And very importantly, governance processes are so key to all of this. Any funder will want to understand that the local governments participating in any of these programs follow certain governance processes before extending any financing. So thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Carla. I mean, there's that key kind of saying that money talks. So it's really wonderful to get a bit more indication or more understanding of that governance or finance landscape to learn more. So thank you very much. A question has come through around your kind of, through the work that you've done, the key challenges in governance and how that underpins access to finance. So maybe when you can reflect on that, and then when we come back to questions answer, you can answer that question. I'm going to move on to our second speaker, Mr. Kun Yoon Lee. So please can you unmute yourself, Carla? You can turn your video off. So Mr. Lee, please unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Can you hear me and see me well?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, congratulations on Africa Day and the RISE Africa's first virtual action festival. I thank you for inviting me. I wanted to be invited because I wanted to share with you what my organization WIGO is doing to build the future now in Africa. I'll be brief. We're living in a world of rapid change. It's very fast and unavoidable. Like always, throughout human history, knowledge and technology are driving the change. The Stone Age did not end for lack of stones. Technology ended it. Our current industrial age seems to be at the end due to the smart technology. A recent study, McKinsey study, shows that even the current level of smart applications deliver significant results. Up to 300 lives can be saved each year. 30 to 40% of crimes can be reduced, and you can live 8 to 15% longer and healthier, etc. The current COVID-19 testifies that smart technology and digitization of your government is the key to fast and efficient response. But considering the speed of the technological development, we can say that even the most advanced smart cities today still have a long way to go. Now, the question is what it takes to build a happy smart cities. My answer is fourfold: technology, PPPs, open mind, and networking. First, technology matters, of course, as I already emphasized, but the basis or foundation is more important. A phone doesn't work without network. Practically speaking, I'd like to emphasize the importance of electronic government. I never know an example of good smart city without good e-government. Build e-government if you want a smart city. Second, PPPs matter. Public-private partnership has a long history. It basically says that our economy cannot prosper without PPPs. Government provides business environment, and private sector puts in expertise and investments. Private sector builds digital platforms, and it makes money when the platforms are successful. Third, you have to open and change your mind. City officials should change their mind. They are not the owner of the city. They have to admit that they don't know very much. They should awaken to the importance of technology and invest in it for the future. The citizens should change their mind too. They are not passive bystanders or order takers. They are the real owners of the city, and they have to actively create their ideal smart cities. Cities make citizens happier, and citizens make cities smarter. Fourth, international collaboration and networking matter. Smart city projects are not one-off, but evolutionary. It means that we need many friends and partners. We need to learn from others. Even advanced cities have a lot to learn from developing cities. Allow me to take this opportunity to briefly introduce my organization, WeGo. We are 11 years old and we have over 210 member cities and companies. We build the smart cities. Our vision is smart and happy cities for all humanity. I'm proud to say that WeGo is the one and only independent international organization with a standing secretariat exclusively working for smart cities. Roughly speaking, our activities are twofold. First, we are a platform where members share information and best practices. We organize international conferences and training programs and workshops. We provide the cities with networking opportunities, and we provide companies with business opportunities. Second, we help cities to implement smart city projects. We provide practical solutions to our members. For example, we share a special application called the Smart City Driver to guide our members to design their own ideal smart cities. We also conduct feasibility studies and offer our products like smart city guidelines and catalogs. Now, I would like to give you 3 practical recommendations. First, as I mentioned earlier, e-government has a central importance for smart cities. No e-government, no smart city. In top-ranking smart cities like Seoul, Korea, all the municipal administrative jobs are digitized so that it takes only a couple of seconds to, for instance, issue a document like a birth certificate. E-government enables you to implement all the smart policies like smart security, smart transportation, and smart everything. It also provides you with a platform for civic participation. With primary importance in mind, WeGo is launching e-government thematic group on June 7th. You are cordially invited. Second, if you need a network, look into this, look into what we are doing. WeGo is working on creating smart city network in Africa. It's called Africa Smart City Network. It's an association of like-minded cities and companies in Africa. It aims to help cities to build and improve smart cities so that they can build the future now. Our regional office in Abuja is leading this, and we are working together with Smart Africa Alliance. A pre-workshop is scheduled for June 29th. You are, of course, welcome to join the meeting. Lastly, let me repeat, as I briefly mentioned, WeGo shares with members a special application called the Smart City Driver. It is a special tool to guide our members to design their own smart cities. You can create your smart city online with the help of the program. When the pandemic situation is over, we'll go for the implementation stage offline. WeGo will try to mobilize our entrepreneurial and financial partners to put the design into reality. I strongly recommend you to try this. And if you like to fully appreciate the benefit, I recommend you to join WeGo as members. Well, those were my messages this morning, and I hope we can continue working together. Congratulations again, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much for that great overview. We're going to have our first question and answer session for the first 2 speakers. So Carla, can you turn your video back on, please? Ms. Cindy, please keep your video on as well, because we'll have some directed to you. Great. So our first question, it's for you, Carla, and it's linked to you painting this wonderful picture of the finance landscape. But what are the big kind of challenges that you've seen in the work that you've done linked to governance that might impact access to finance? And then, yeah, just that was the question that came through. So.
Yeah, I think it's really about trying to understand the mind of the funders. So the process that most funders follow, like a DFI or commercial funder, is really to look to what is publicly available on a local government to better understand how well it's governed. So what they tend to do is to go to the latest annual financial statement. In South Africa, there's the Auditor General's report, and they form a view on how well governed a local government is through those documents. Unless they have a more kind of a closer relationship and they can spend more time trying to understand the governance processes. But realistically, it's really important for local governments to make sure that they portray themselves in the best possible light through these publicly available documents, because that is really what funders rely on to give them guidance on how well governed a local government is. And it will indicate, and it's indicated through things like whether local governments can manage their budgets efficiently. Are they delivering on their budgets? So not only just whether they can avoid losses, but actually whether they can spend their capital expenditure budgets. Because as a funder, a red flag, for example, is one where a municipality has been given extensive grants in the past, but they've never actually spent all their capex budgets because they don't have the due processes in place to make sure that money is spent as it's programmed to be spent. So I think hopefully that gives a bit of insight into how a funder on a bilateral basis thinks about it. On a more kind of, when one's looking at like the big climate funders out there, like the GCF and the NAMA facility, as part of the application process, there are lots of hurdles that the applicant needs to jump through to demonstrate their governance processes and document how the funds will be, what processes will be in place to ensure that the funds are spent as they should be spent. Also, the GCF makes use of accredited entities, such as the African Development Bank in Africa and the DBSA, to take on some of that responsibility because they often know the recipients well. Thanks.
Thank you, Carla. Great. And that kind of covers the finance and the governance lens of the session. So, Mr. Lee, over to you for the technology kind of link. You spoke about those kind of 4 areas that you see is the way forward, but a more kind of practical guidance question aimed at you is how do local and regional governments really ensure that those technologies are inclusive and sustainable?
Thank you for the question. That's a very important one. And I like to point out that 60% of the population of Africa will live in urban area by 2030. And by the end of the century, 13 of the 20 most populous urban areas in the world will be in Africa. For cities in Africa, inclusivity and sustainability are even more critical. Sustainability lies in the interconnection of 3 crucial elements: environmental, economic, and social. Nothing lasts long if the earth, human habitat, keeps being abused, or if majority of people are in poverty, or if people feel unhappy. So here, the core word is people. Inclusiveness is nothing but the social aspect of sustainability. The bigger the excluded portion of people, the less happy gets the whole society. I kept emphasizing this human factor of smart technology and city. Real smart city should do 3 things at the same time. Number 1, it should become intelligent enough to solve city problems like safety, mobility, ecology, etc. Smart people cannot be happy in dumb cities. Second, it should make people feel happy. Happiness is what a smart city is all about. So a smart city should be not only livable, but lovable. Smart people cannot be happy in ugly cities. A third, smart city should let people decide what they mean by happiness. People should be at the center, and they are the owner of the city. This is a beautiful trinity of intelligence, happiness, and citizen centricity. Now, how do we ensure that smart cities and smart technology are inclusive and sustainable? Well, that's what I said for my presentation. 4 things matter: technology, PPPs, open mind, and networking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Carla, I'm going back to you. We have more of a comment than a question, but it's from Rashik, and it says, I'm concerned that the entire local government finance model, so rates, electricity, tariffs, is broken. Without this changing, financing climate action will continue to suffer until there's real power for local governments to raise revenues. We're perhaps trying to make an already broken financial model work for climate action. Maybe you could just give some comments to that comment.
So it's a difficult one to answer because I guess we have to work with what is there, but we can certainly improve on what is there. So I agree that it's key for local governments to grow their own revenues, to have more capacity to borrow money, to fund the sort of projects that have real impact and that have a climate lens. And the more control you have through own revenue, the more you are able to do that. Second point around tariffs is also key, that tariffs do have to be cost reflective and your collections have to be effective in order to run any service on a sustainable basis. But I do think the funders, it's really important to if you can get those two right, to have a good balance between own revenue and cost reflective tariffs, then to also put these to use by borrowing, and often there are concessionary loans available or grants or blended finance if municipalities can demonstrate that they can use their own revenue and cost reflective tariffs to repay. So I think funders are important, because if we, it's like when you're trying to buy a house, if you have to buy a house just with your own revenues, it's going to take you years to save up. But if you can borrow and have the asset and then repay it over a period of time, things will happen much quicker.
Thank you, Carla. Mr. Lee, back to you. We have a question from Mr. Coffey. I think Mr. Coffey. It says, does your program take into account the ecological districts? We are an association which will currently create in Africa an ecological and social city of 2,000 inhabitants in favor of the poor. How can we go help us?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, my office is located in the center of Seoul City, capital city of South Korea, and the building hosts eClay Asia Pacific office as well. We are very close, and we are working together mainly for Asia Pacific countries in Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia as well. And we are co-hosting international conferences and workshops as well. And we are working also together with CityNet. I don't know whether you heard of the name CityNet, which is an international urban organization based in Asia Pacific area. So tripartite collaboration is going on in terms of organizing international conferences. But as far as the actual implementation of ecological project is concerned, we are not deeply involved from WeGo's side, but we are working together to promote international awareness and information sharing practices and such things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. And staying with you, we do have another question for you, and I'm just wondering if you have heard of the Konza Smart City project in Kenya.
I don't think we have such projects in Kenya yet.
Okay, it's more just a
yeah.
question about have you heard of it and what is your opinion about it? But that's great. We have
In
we
case
do have
you hope that we better get involved in your efforts in Kenya, I would instruct my staff to talk to you.
Great, thank you. And that brings us a close to our first question and answer session. So thank you very much, Secretary General and Carla. We really appreciate you being here and all your insights. Yeah, as always, it's been an honor.
Thank you.
We're going to move to our third speaker. So unfortunately, Brenda can't unmute herself. I put her video on, but Brenda, if you could please unmute yourself. So I have three questions for you. The first question is, what has the city of Mtutuzi recently been doing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And how has the city gone about exploring opportunities for technological advancement linked to reducing these greenhouse gases?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I hope I'm audible. Just to provide a short context for listeners who are not familiar, the city of Mtutuzi is on the southern tip of Africa. We are in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We like the second largest city in that province. But what makes us unique is our strong industrial base in a very environmentally sensitive environment. And to top it all, we also have the largest port in terms of volumes, tonnage, mainly bulk exports in the country. And we also have a growing and ever stronger getting SEZ. So we've got all these dynamics within our city, which just makes this such a topical issue: greenhouse gas emissions, environmental sensitivity, industrial base, etc. Now, to respond more directly to the question, it all starts off with a mindset and admitting that there's a problem and something has to be done about it. And yes, we are maybe in the global scale a small player, but everybody has to do their bit in addressing these issues. We as a municipality are strongly institutionalizing the SDGs, and we're taking a cue from all the way there internationally. And that's in our sustainability agenda of the municipality. We are a facilitator and authority, not the developer, but we believe that we can lead by example and plant the seed within the big industry players within our area. Now, to do all this, you need to have information, because information is knowledge and knowledge is power. Now, to do that, we are developing a database specifically on our greenhouse gas emissions. But while we were doing that and are still doing that, we've already started with some initiatives on the side as well. And I will refer more to them a bit later. But when we did our greenhouse gas inventory, our results were that the municipality and their direct activities contribute 10% to the municipal greenhouse gas emissions. Industry, a startling more than 50%. So immediately that tells us that we need to focus on industry and how do we influence industry in the way we work. We as a municipality, as I said, we've been starting with a number of initiatives on the side, a lot of them with grants and assistance from outside organizations, looking at motion sensor lights, efficient street lights, etc. But I'll share more on that later. But with this greenhouse gas inventory that we did, we also prepared green building guidelines for our municipality. They've been adopted by council. And again, it's a process. We need to internalize them within our communities going forward. But what's so special, if I can use that word, about the green building guidelines is that sectoral interventions are identified and brought to the fore. In other words, how we as a municipality plan. What is our standpoint about parking ratios? Do we really want more cars coming into the CBD? How are we dealing with public transport? Are we promoting public transport? Are we promoting NMT, non-motorized transport? How we provide services? Are we looking at permeable surfaces in our CBDs, etc., etc.? So we're looking at all these matters, and I'm not going to go into too much details, but as I said, we're looking at it more. We must look at alternative energy, how we supply water, etc. Then we also need to emphasize that to deal with this, we require partnerships, or as Mr. Lee said, networking is the answer. And again, we can pull that back to SDG 17. And for that, as I indicated, our industries contribute more than 50% to our greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot work and attend our greenhouse gas industries without partnering with our industries on this matter. Just to close off, as I said, we as a municipality have to get our act together. We have to lead by example so that we can have more strength to force industry and other role players to follow as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So onto the second question, how does this technology advancement, this landscape that you've spoken about, link with improving access to finance and effective governance? And what is the City of Mfuthuzi doing to support these two areas in this installation of those urban meters that you spoke about?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to respond maybe by talking to the last matter first, regarding the installation of meters. Municipality has a long-standing relationship with ICLEI, and there's been a lot of benefits from it. And one of the most recent initiatives is the support from ICLEI with the installation of smart meters. Initially, this project was conceived to do smart meters in municipal buildings, but then but the municipality has already started doing that independently. So the smart meters were installed in street light areas, and this project was completed February 21, a couple of months ago. And yes, under very difficult circumstances, it was managed, implemented in our COVID lockdown stages. But yeah, we can say that the meters are installed, and now we're going to obviously be monitoring consumption and detect where possible interventions might be needed. So that is another nice example that is happening. As I indicated in my first response, we've done a number of initiatives on the side already, and have had savings which we were able to convert to monetary terms. For example, just LED lightings that installed, savings of more than 400,000 Rand. Also, we were able to look at the savings in terms of kilowatt hours, as well as the carbon reduction of these measures that have been taken. So there's always been a way of measuring it, which is very beneficial for a municipality when you can put something in Rand and cents value. You asked about governance. I've already mentioned the importance of partnerships or networking. Fortunately, in our municipality, there is partnerships ongoing. We have strong SOEs in our municipal space. We have TNPA, which is the Transnet National Ports Authority. We have the IDZ, Industrial Development Zone. And we have got arrangements and agreements in place with those organs of state to look at partnerships. And with our regular meetings, climate change, greenhouse gases are on our agenda. But importantly, we also have a series of industrial environmental forums that are set up. They meet quarterly. I think there's about 9 of them, where we meet with the respective big industry players. And look at information sharing, etc., etc. And that partnerships have got a potential to expand towards this goal of greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of governance, when we did our green building guideline, we also looked at some incentives, how we can create the implementation of the green building guidelines, how we can make them attractive for role players. Yes, it takes time to implement. Local government is a very regulated and legislated environment, but we definitely have some good ideas, and we're looking at how we can implement these incentives to comply with our green building guidelines. In terms of access to finance, the introductory remarks made and setting the scene on green finance were very interesting. Once again, we have got opportunities for opportunity or developments that we do believe we should pursue in terms of green bonds. We have an example in our commercial area and in one of our industrial areas, our industrial precincts, noting that if you look at how city was developed, it was developed pre-strong environmental laws, etc. Now we are really working with the environment and planning with the environment, and the outcomes we're having in our planning is really really very pleasant, and we're looking forward to implementing these projects going forward. Financing, also we are using the PPP avenue. We have a wastewater reuse project that is now in phase 2. The feasibility has already been done. Phase 2 procurement is being entered into. In short, we're looking at 40 megaliters of water that's daily pumped out to sea that we're looking at reusing for waste. This project came about during the drought we had not too long ago, and the urgency to really relook at how we are wasting water and we can actually reuse water. But as I said, it's not all about finance either. In our municipality, we have a green team that's an interdepartmental team where we've repurposed our human resources and the way we think to look at how we can look at climate change and how we can contribute to minimize climate change impacts. We have one of our members of our green team is our waste section, and they are busy with a project feasibility for waste diversion. We've also got other members. We've got a total of 10 members of 5 different departments on our green team, and we're just repurposing the way we think and doing our daily operational jobs to have this focus on a more greener environment with less emissions, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. There's so much in there, so much inspiration for other African cities and other local governments. And your Implituzi really is leading the force in this. So thanks for all those contributions. I have one last question, and you kind of alluded to it in your previous answer. But how has all the work that you've been doing, particularly under this installation of meters, helped you generate data that makes a case for similar projects or similar work for renewable energy and energy efficient technology? And also, what information is still needed to make this case, to help the local government really make this case to financiers for greenhouse gas reductions? Thanks.
Okay, as I indicated from a previous response, we've got some first data on initiatives that have been successful in one of our, for example, in one of our towns in Pangeni. We've got data on energy saving. Also, they have solar panels on municipal buildings, etc. And we've got, as I said, details of data and savings in kilowatt hours. So yes, we are trying to roll out these energy efficient technologies based on the fact that we've got proof that it works. Now we are waiting for more data from our streetlights initiative to also again have the ammunition to prove that it works. All municipalities, if we can prove something being sustainable financially, it really flies. I think everybody can share that. But also importantly is that we are also rolling out these processes through demonstration projects that we have. And one of our demonstration projects is linked to the National Urban Policy. In South Africa, we call it the IUDF. And essentially, climate is identified as a cross-cutting issue. And we found it as well that if we do not internalize climate action in various departments, it won't exist on its own. It's only effective if it's embedded in activities. So we're working on having that as a focus for our climate change efforts. I think also what's important to note is that we are also throughout our work with ICLEI been benefiting from partnerships with ICLEI, but also from exploring partnerships with other role players. We have, for example, partnerships with the C40s going on transformative river management. We've got a UAS partnership that's got to do with the water scarcity and water conservation. And also through ICLEI, we've been receiving support for training of building inspectors. And again, this all talks to embedding all this climate change, cross-cutting issues in the municipality. Yeah, that's sort of a response to that question. But basically, the key point is that we have to embed it within various departments as a critical element. It's not a lone standing element.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that there's going to be quite a few questions coming your way because there was so much valuable insight in that those answers. So thank you very much, Brenda. So we'll get back to you in the question and answer session. So now we'll move on to our last speaker before the question and answers, Patrick Masuka from the city of Kampala. So Patrick, if you can unmute yourself, turn on your video if it's working. And I believe Patrick is going to weave a great story for us in what Kampala is doing. So over to you, Patrick.
Hi, everyone. Much, Kevin. Thanks for the organizers for this wonderful session on Rise Africa. Building the future now. How cities are expanding the territory of planning, governance, and finance. I think one key important thing to start off with is to recognize the times that we are living in an urban age with over 50% of humanity living in cities. And therefore, if we are talking about sustainable development goals, they are going to be realized if our cities become efficient, if our cities are resilient, and if our cities are sustainable. Looking at urbanization, looking at Africa and the journey we are taking, there are two major fundamental issues that come on face. One, we are urbanizing younger. Most of our young people are flooding our cities looking for jobs. That jobs do not exist because our economies are basically vending economies, vending goods made in China and India. And we are urbanizing poorer. Most of the other continents, by the time they reached our level of urbanization, their income levels were actually high. And fundamentally because the drivers and fundamentals behind their urbanization drive are non-existing in Africa. And this is where the challenge is. If we're looking at building cities of the future, we need to be mindful of what is it that is driving urbanization. Because normally in those other continents, when agricultural productivity increased fundamentally, then the labor force that was laid off found their way in towns looking for non-agricultural jobs. Here it's the reverse. We're having cities that are sprawling beyond control into the arable land, taking over, swallowing up villages where people were predominantly doing agriculture. Now, because of that change in land use, many of the youth find themselves with no alternative other than getting off the land and finding their way in cities, finding their way in Kampala, finding their way in Dar es Salaam. Wherever you look is basically the same scenario that is explaining this youth drift into our cities, looking for jobs. And what do you see? In all cities across Africa, you see a common trend. They are all over the street, trying to complete the last trading mile as street vendors. What do they vend? Look at it. In Uganda, it's very painful to see that some of the things they're actually vending is things like toothpicks, things like chewing gum, and it's not only in Uganda, but wherever you go, vending newspapers. Now, most of our youth are actually throwing away their productive labor force and the general, which is a challenge which we need to look at. Now, as more of our cities are sprouting out, we are realizing that we're now moving in it's called frog jump sort of urbanization. You've got one piece of urban space, then you enter into a purely rural environment, then another piece. Now, that sort of urbanization is generating 5 major challenges, and these are the challenges I want to focus on in our discussion with you. One, as more and more people find their way into our cities, what are they going to do? How are we going to create the jobs if we're building cities of the future now? How are we providing the houses? Where are they going to stay as more young people find their way into our cities? And okay, how are we going to connect this frog-jumped urbanization? And what is the cost? Where are the finances going to come from to finance this huge infrastructure gap that we're actually generating between the built-up space and the environment if we have to safeguard our cities from the negative effects of climate change? And lastly, if the arable land has been urbanized, how are we going to feed our cities? How are we going to feed these so many mouths that are finding their way into the urban areas? Now, if we are going to build cities of the future, those are some of the key issues that I thought that are going to be very, very important. And as urban administrators, our responsibility is to offer urban services. In such a disconnected urban environment, the big question that comes on board, which actually COVID-19 has laid bare, is that cities and city administrators, as the first line of defense, can no longer and are not equipped to respond to the increasing pandemics, to the increasing urban challenges. So how are we therefore going to realize sustainable development goals? How are we going to localize them, given that the foundation is that weak? So the challenge before us now is, as we are trying to retrofit the urban environment, where the hope where we need to look at is, as we're planning to develop the other 2/3 of our cities, because Africa's urbanization is approximately 30%. That means that most of the cities are yet to be built. The question therefore is that how are we going to build the city of the future in the yet new urban form that needs to be created? What are the critical drivers that we need to be mindful of? So what have we done in Kampala to respond to that? And also, how are we as Africa trying to be able to make sure that building cities of the future now can actually be able to deliver sustainability, inclusiveness, and resilience? What we are looking at are basically the 3 major issues that I'm going to, I'm highlighting here. Number one, building on I've forgotten her name, the first presenter, better financing. Where is the money going to come from? That should be in number one, because without finances, then we can never be able to build the cities that we are looking for. So building better finances is one of the issues that people look at. And starting point is boosting our own capacity for our own source revenue. In Kampala, in the last 10 years, we've been able to grow our own source revenue by over 20% technology.
Patrick, sorry.
An 80-20 principle.
Patrick, sorry to stop you. I just maybe if you could just turn your video off. The internet's battling a bit, so if you could just turn your video off, that might help the sound.
It's poor. Okay.
Sorry about that, but yeah, I think it'll help if you just turn your video off.
Thank you. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much. So I appreciate it. So,
unfortunately, it looks like we've just lost him. Sorry about that. Let's start the question and answer sessions with Brenda, and hopefully Patrick will rejoin us and he can pick up his presentation and then can continue, because I think he was just getting going with some of the guidance lessons. So sorry about that. But Brenda, we have a question for you, directly to you. It's about PPP. How does the city, or Msuzi, ensure the appetite or enabling environment to foster PPP?
Okay, let me try and respond. I think that question is probably what comes up in everybody's mind. Why would somebody do a PPP? And that is where the phased approach assists, phase one being the actual feasibility. In other words, whereas a PPP in its essence assists in transferring some of the cost or risk of a project, it must be proven to be financially viable for the investor. And as I said already, it's not a process that the municipality does on its own. We get guidance from our national treasury, our provincial treasury, GTAC, as the government agency that assists. And in our project, the wastewater reuse, the feasibility has been proven. And that's why we are confidently now entering phase two, which is procurement.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that and for filling the gap while we see Patrick was getting back online. Patrick, can you hear us?
Okay, I can hear you. I was moving towards the end. I don't know if you can, do I still have some 30 minutes?
No, yeah, absolutely. You have 5. So back to you to finish your presentation. Thank you, Patrick.
I apologize. The internet has not done me very good. I was talking about the 3 important issues that we need to focus on if we're going to build the cities of the future now. Number 1, I was talking about the issue of building better finances, improving governance. And here I was talking about the issue of starting with building capacity for our revenue. We're talking about the experience we've gone through in Kampala, where we've been able to grow our revenue by over 50%. By the issue, by introduction of technology. Also the award we got in 2017. And I also talked about basically looking at how African cities use issues of bond issuance. We tried to issue a bond in 2017, but we failed because of the regulatory environment. So that brings in the governance question. How is the authorizing environment supporting our ability to build future cities now? Because governance is the thread, is the glue onto which everything must happen. We failed because our law had a 10% limitation that if we're going to issue any bond, we're supposed to issue a bond up 10% of our own source revenue, which was not helping because the cost of administration, whether you are issuing a bond for $1 million or $10 million, is actually the same. So we're not able to move forward. The key important issue here is how is African cities prepared to develop their creditworthiness so that they can be able to be attractive to the private sector. And the next important point we need to look at is territorial development. When you look at all cities in Africa, from Kampala to Durban to Nairobi, is that most of them grew organically from small administrative units, from small towns and trading centers. And the level of physical planning was never followed through to guide land use patterns. So what do we have? We're having a situation where the land has been overgrown with cities have overgrown with informality, and there's no investor who is going to bring in this money in a highly informal urban setting. So the focus now, other than us building bankable projects, we need to move towards building bankable cities. And at the center of that is the issue of physical planning and territorial development. We are looking at a multiplicity of multidisciplinary investment that is intended to make the urban cities work. That's really to make our cities work and function. And the last and most important thing is the reality of our times. The issue of climate change is with us, and therefore urban resilience is something we need to plan for. If we are going to build sustainable cities, resilience and preparing our cities for disasters, our capacity to mitigate and capacity to build back better in case a disaster has happened is a key major fundamental issue. Urbanization is the defining force of the 21st century, and cities must plan for the growth that includes everyone. But key question is who is to do it? Given that the human capital development across all our cities, the technical people are supposed to drive this are actually lacking. When you come to Kampala, the number of physical planners we have are not anyway responding to the rate of urbanization. In any of the field you look at, the pandemics have exposed us bare. Now, even the level of the human health experts that need to be able to safeguard and save our population is actually lacking. So developing requisite human capital becomes the last critical point that we must focus on, so that we can be able to respond to rapid urbanization. And on this, we are thinking about establishing an Africa City Managers Administrated Initiative. And the idea is simple, is that Africa is not devoid of success stories. There are quite many different areas. When you go to the city of Durban, you find a very resilient framework that has been created, that has been able to integrate the blue, the green, the brown infrastructure with the issue of creating of jobs. When you come to Kampala, you find successes in the ability to mobilize revenues. When you go to Nairobi, under the Africa City Managers and Administrators Initiative, we are looking at building communities of practice that will be able to inform the second phase of Africa's urbanization. We are looking at documenting these best practices and making them available as our African template that speaks to our uniqueness in America are actually lacking, as I had earlier said. And also creating a system of support of mentor and mentee cities that will be able to shorten learning. The idea here is that we need to bring to our cities requisite skills and competencies that need to guide the second wave of urbanization, while retrofitting and regenerating the already built up urban space. That way, we shall be able to build the future cities now and create a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient urban future for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. There's incredible insight into the current landscape in Africa cities, and also such a strong message of hope and inspiration. So thank you very much. Hopefully giving everybody a good taste of their future path and what is expected, or what to inspire them. There's quite a few questions coming through for both you and Brenda. So now we'll move on to the proper question and answer session. We've already answered one question on PPUP, which Brenda took. And so I will guide the second question to you, Patrick. It's from Ellie, and she says, you highlighted a very important issue, unemployment among young people, and the fact that cities of the future need to be efficient, sustainable, and resilient. But how can we involve young and unemployed people more in the development processes using thinking and creating? So I want back to you, Patrick, to just reflect on that.
Oh, thanks so much. And that takes me back to one key issue. And that issue is, how do we move our economies from vending economies to productive economies? Let me give you an example. During COVID in Kampala, the price of a tray of eggs dropped from 11,000 Uganda shillings to 6,000 shillings. Fundamentally because of one thing, that during lockdown, most of the youth who was vending and selling of street foods were actually not working. Now, when I looked at that, I said, okay, wait a minute. Then how is the poetry chain working, or how was it disorganized? Now, when we go through a product and sector value chain as the basis of planting productive economies, then we shall be able to create jobs. Youth are on the streets not because they want to. They're on the streets because alternatives are not available. Now, if you are going to go through a sector-wise approach and you're able to support the various segments along that product value chain, then you can be able to create the necessary jobs. What are we doing? Most of the time, the government intervention are isolated, they are not connected, and because of that isolation, the synergies that ought to be harnessed are actually lost. So the starting point here is, how do we make capital available? How do we support creating workspaces in our cities? And how do we make sure that those workspaces are actually connected, the bigger functioning of the urban economy? That way, the problem with unemployment will actually be addressed. And also, we need to change the tide. The youth should not be finding their way into our cities, but can we create urban growth centers wherever they are in the growing secondary cities? And can we create a system of rural-urban linkage that can be able to support the economies to work? That way, these challenges we're grappling with will actually be addressed. And that will help us to move away from congestion and crime. That is the next phase of disorganized urbanization we're actually going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, the question of youth and civic participation is always a big one, and I definitely think needs the attention that you've given it. So thank you. Brenda, I'll go back to you. There's a question posed to you, where you say you mentioned capturing 40 mils of water pumped into the sea. What methods are you looking at in capturing the water, and how will they fit within the city development?
Okay, thank you. At the moment, there is wastewater that is pumped out to sea from industrial processes via sea outfall. And essentially, it's looking at intercepting that outfall and reusing the water, purifying it, obviously, so that it can be used for industrial purposes again. The situation is also that at the moment, in some industrial processes, use potable water. So you also don't want that situation. So we're looking at really repurposing how we use our water, what quality waters. So yeah, it's basically existing sea outfall, and we want that to be intercepted for recycling purposes.
Perfect. Thank you. Very practical answer. So back to Patrick, there's another question for you. How do we promote sustainability by eradicating this corruption at the local government level, which affects the poorest of the poor? Any advice from Kampala? Patrick, I think you're still on mute.
I had a network failure. Is it possible to repeat? I didn't hear the question. I apologize. Can you get back? Can you repeat for me?
No problem. The question links to how do we promote sustainability when corruption at local level is often quite strife, and yeah, any advice from Kampala around this issue?
Wow. Interestingly, the issue of corruption is a vice that is cutting. It's a vice of our generation, really. And it's a vice in America, it's a vice in Africa, it's a vice in all layers of and that's one of the key ways we can be able to how can we create where those and automated most of our revenue sources. Very fundamental. We never increased revenue collection through new revenue instruments. No, we increased revenue collection because we sealed the gaps, and technology helps us to remove the effect of human hand in the revenue collection, because everything was available in technology. People were paying through technology. Assessments were through technology. Receipts were going through technology. Pre and post audit to see how the system is working. So if we're going to address the rampant challenge of corruption, we can never run away from technology. And also building a mass momentum of people who can call for accountability and transparency. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. We did lose your connectivity a little bit there, but hopefully that answer got enough of the answer to satisfy that question. I'm going to stay with you, Patrick, for your last question, which was how can we solve the challenge of informal housing coupled with disorganized, urbanized environments and economic development of Africa?
For me, it goes down. Let me use the example of Kampala, and I think it can throw more light, and maybe I'll transpose it over to Nairobi. It has both an economic side and a physical planning side, and maybe a regulatory side. Let me start from the physical planning side, because our cities have organically grown. And we've confused the concept of mixed use to actually push through a heavy informality. Organizing land for housing settlement is becoming a challenge. When you come to cities like Uganda, where land belongs to the people, and if government is to use it for any other use, people must be compensated. That creates another overhead cost. So then the land laws, the land policies are becoming one of the challenges. And lastly is the economy. And with the economy, I want to use the success story in Nairobi. Nairobi, they created a mass movement along they call them SACCOs, saving associations, savings and credit associations. And now some literature indicate that actually the SACCOs in Kenya account for between 20 to 30% of their economy. Now, that in itself created a very strong organized demand effect. Now, if we're going to address the housing problem, you need to look at the two sides, the supply side with those constraints and the demand side with those enabling environment. Now, that is where the problem is. Now, in Nairobi, I've been able to succeed fundamentally because they addressed the land equation, because land belongs to the government, and government was able to gazette particular pieces of land, and were able to attract private capital. And because they were sure of the off-takers through the circles, the equation was complete. So we need to look at how we complete the entire equation, on how, for us in Kampala, what we are now working on under the Greater Kampala Economic Development Strategy, you are now started negotiating with the landlords to bring them onto board as equity investors. Equity here, that they contribute their land and bring land on table. When they bring land on table, then we look for, we are working with the World Bank that are already accepted to support investment in the overhead costs, because no private sector person earns anything from overhead costs, which are enabling and catalytic for the household, for the housing sector growth. So that overhead cost will be removed, and then what will remain is the private capital money that will go into rentable space. Now, once that has been organized, we now want to work with our pension fund, National Social Security Fund, to be the off-takers. Once we're able to complete that chain, then we can be in position to address the housing challenge in Africa and in many of African cities.
Thank you, Patrick. Wonderful insights into all that work and also cross-city pollination. So thank you very much. We have one final question as part of this question answer session, and I'll guide it to you, Brenda. It's around SDG alignment. And how do you ensure that the work that you're doing at a local government is aligned with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement and all the other targets that are out there, but more importantly, reporting? How do you ensure that the work that you're doing is known by national governments, that they can then report as per their processes? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try and respond. I think what we've done is during our, as I indicated, that we've done SDG localization, we've also grouped, roughly grouped the SDGs in terms of the governance SDGs. I've spoken about them, that's 16 and 17. Biosphere related SDGs, that's climate action, life below land, etc., or below water. The social needs SDGs, no poverty, zero hunger, etc., and gender equality SDG 5. And then there's a lot of drivers of change as well, which would be quality education, decent work, etc. Now, what we've done is in our municipality, we've identified champions that whose work responsibilities and operational responsibilities talk to these SDGs. Some SDGs are not local government linked, for example, quality education. So that is the first step, how we're trying to internalize how we are going to see how we're actually making a difference. In terms of reporting it at our, first of all, our municipal level, we're still busy developing that process, but there is actually more and more awareness and working towards it. So the ideal would be that it is linked to our quarterly performance reporting. In other words, all our targets and objectives of our IDP, the link to respective SDGs would then be indicated, and all those reporting are obviously elevated up to national government. Paris Agreement, we are a signatory. There are various ways that we are reporting, but yes, the reporting could actually be improved, to be honest with you. We've got a lot of improvement we can still do in how we report on our work. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brenda, for that reflection. And thank you both, Brenda and Patrick, for your time and for such incredible insights and inspiration in this session. So that brings us close to the end of the second question and answers. So we have heard from different African cities and organizations on the inspiring work they're doing. We've also heard of the challenges, opportunities, and the context. We hope these case studies have provided inspiration for building the future now. And you have seen how our African cities are really pushing the boundary around planning, governance, finance, and technology. But what next? What is the way forward? ICLEI Africa has found that there are many ideas for projects out there, many ideas for the way forward. But which ones are likely to go anywhere? Which ones are likely to attract finance? Which are good enough because they make the holistic picture that addresses governance, technology, and the finance criteria? A bankability scorecard helps local governments chart this path, and it answers some of these questions. So ICLEI Africa spent time developing this bankability scorecard, which is key objective is to build a better understanding of what projects are likely to attract finance. That's either blended finance or grant finance. And Carla, as our keynote, spoke about the difference, and I'll also go into that a little bit later. Next. So we have local governments that are in a position to borrow money or enter into long-term contracts. And we also have the other local governments that unfortunately aren't in this position. Next. So this bankability toolkit really starts to provide a target for local governments, both those local governments that can access finance and go into these long-term contracts, and also those that can't. And it really provides an analysis, a really detailed look into these pilot ideas, these pilot solutions that local governments are coming up with. Next. So the answers that this bankability scorecard gives you is my idea, is my solution, is my project likely to attract blended finance? Is it likely to attract grant finance? And also it shows us what our financiers is looking at, what information is needed. So just to remind you all about what blended finance is. Blended finance is a model where you combine various types of finance. So for example, public finance or private finance to be able to create this blended solution to being able to fund your projects. So it might include various things like debt, equity, grants, loans, and other public support. Grant is a contract or tender for a particular project or a particular pilot idea. Next. So what is the structure of this bankability scorecard? Well, area 1 of the scorecard contains very specific information to your idea, to your solution, the thing you're wanting to test. And it also provides some calculations to see the viability of this. Area 2 and 3 then contains a list of assumptions that you are making in your pilot idea. The tool is very clearly coded for outputs. They all have different colors. And it's also very managed through a weighted system. So a very kind of key score based on the key outputs that you're wanting to achieve. Next. The tool divides into two target groups. The first one is a user and the second one is an owner. So the user of the tool is, of course, local governments or subnational governments. The owner of the tool is what we've called finance experts or the developer, the ICLEI Africa, as we've developed the tool. Most areas that require owner information have already been set, and this is based on the current finance landscape. And so really it puts the onus on the local government, the user, to engage with the tool and work with what's already in the tool that's been provided by the owner, and they were able to work through to see the bankability of their pilot idea or the solution. Next. So what is the minimum qualifications for this tool? Well, firstly, before you even begin working through the tool as a local government, the project or your idea, your solution must meet the minimum qualifying criteria. And that is really SDG 11 and SDG 13. So these SDGs get taken down from a drop-down list, and the ability of your idea or your solution or your project to achieve those SDGs is unpacked. And if it comes up as non-applicable, then the tool asks you to consider another project because your project already does not meet the minimum criteria. And then the user, so the local government, is instructed to proceed if it meets those minimum criteria as achieving the SDGs. Next. So then we get into the assessment. The real tool, the assessment, this bankability scorecard, asks 3 questions. And those 3 questions determine whether you, as a local government, should go through a blended finance model or grant-only assessment approach. Based on those 3 questions and based on the pathway that the tool sends you down, either blended finance or grant-only, the project will then be evaluated based on various categories. There's 7 categories for blended finance model and there's 6 categories for grant funding model. Each category, at the end of each category, a score is given based on the answers that you as a local government submits into this tool. Each category has then a various weighting. That weighting plus the final score for each category gives you a final score for the category, and then all categories together give you a final score, which tells you whether your project is viable to be funded, and if not, what more information is needed to be able to access that finance. Next, please. So here's an overview of what I've just mentioned. As you can see, column B is about answering those 3 questions to have a blended finance or a grant finance model. Based on the answers to that, you will then be taken through the 7 categories for blended finance or the 6 categories for grant finance, which links to things like your impact, your economic impact, how much finance has been committed, various revenue certainty, your capacity, and then also your monitoring and evaluation. I will unpack each section now. And so 7 scores are generated. There's all these weightings per category, and then you finally get your weighted score. Next, please. So just to talk a little bit more on those weightings. As I've said already, the scorecard assigns weightings, and these weightings can be used to rank the projects in terms of their likelihood to attract either blended finance or grant finance. So you can see from the screen at the moment how the different categories are weighted. So for the blended finance, each category is weighted 10%, except for the final one, which is weighted 40%. And then through a grant funded model, which will take you, if you answer those 3 questions for grant pathway, they are weighted at 16.7% each. Next, please. So as you saw previously, there's various categories. So the first category that you're going to be scored against or weighted against is the impact of your project. What change is it really going to make? The impact is assessed by identifying the SDGs that the project is going to achieve. So SDG 11 are not considered because these are, remember, these were the minimum criteria to even begin engaging with the scorecard. The user, you as a local government, will select yes or no against SDG, each SDG, and there's a weighting for each SDG already assigned to the relevant column, and this will give you the total impact score and your total impact weighting for this particular category. Next. The second category is economic assessment. Economic assessment in the Bankability Scorecard, we've tried to keep it very, very simple, and so we've aligned it with job creation. How many jobs are going to be created through your solution or through your project idea? That's going to be used as a proxy to assess the economic potential of your project. And so as a user, as a local government, you'll go through and you'll work out how many jobs will be created, and then you'll get a score as well as based on that weighting. Next, please. So there is some of the questions that might be asked under this particular economic assessment linking to jobs. And you can see somebody's filled that in for 20 years for the lifetime of infrastructure. And next. And then this is how the point system works. So for example, if there's 10 jobs, then you get a point of 20. If you got 40 jobs, you get a point of 50. And that is all worked in parallel with ICLEI Africa through conversations or through the owner of the tool as you are as a local government filling in the scorecard. Next, please. The next category is called committed finance. And this is really linked to how much finance has already been secured by the local government. This often stands the local government to much more stead to be able to get finance if they already are a co-financier of their solution or their project. It just shows that ownership, it shows that buy-in. And so again, there's various questions linked to committed finance, and you'll get your score, and then it is weighted, and this will give you the overall score for this category. Next, please. So for example, this is just showing you a little bit of more information, what that section looks like, how much CapEx is committed by the local government, how much do you need, etc., etc. Do you need donor finance? Is it intergovernmental grants? All the rest of it, and you can fill that in, and then that's how it gives you the score. Next, please. Another category is revenue certainty. So the revenue certainty determines whether a project can support debt and whether a project will be financially sustainable. So this is a big risk for the big financiers out there. Is the project going to be able to actually financially be viable and financially support this project? And so there's a category linked to finance or revenue certainty. Next. So again, this is what a snippet of the tool looks like. Some of the questions underneath the section, for example, to what extent will the revenues cover costs? And then you fill that in, and there's guidance throughout the scorecard filling in these questions, and again, gives you a weighting for this category. Next. I think this is the second to last category, is linked to capacity to implement. So it's really linked to that governance ability that we've been talking about, these three spheres: finance, governance, and technology. And this is a very important governance section around what is the capacity to actually implement and make the impact that the solution or the idea is suggesting. And this is assessed through 5 questions that need to be answered by the local government. And of course, again, points are allocated per question. So these are some of the questions that are in the tool. How is the local government already managing existing service level agreements? Are they managing existing PPP contracts? Has there been a project manager assigned to the project? Is there monitoring, verification, and reporting team? All these kind of questions all hold a weighting to see how viable the project is. Next. And I think this is the last category. Actually, I think it's the second last category is data readiness. How much data is there at the fingertips of local government to be able to advocate for the work, and also to ensure reporting of the project's impact. And so if you could say next, there'll be some questions that I just showed. Next. Oh, okay, never mind. But yeah, there's some questions under data readiness, which will allow you to show how effective you are at reporting your change that you've actually made, and how important how ready you are at capturing the evidence for that change to report for monitoring and evaluation. Because as we know, we're really monitoring, evaluation, and learning for finance and donors is absolutely key to show that their finance actually went somewhere and made a difference. So just to recap on everything I've said, the tool takes you through two pathways: access a blended finance, which is a group pool of funding, or just a simple grant financing mechanism. If you are guided down the blended finance pathway, you'll go through 7 categories, answering questions for each category. If you go through a grant finance, you'll be going through 6 categories. The final score, it gives you a better understanding of which projects are likely to attract funding under the various models. It also shows you the various gaps. As you're working through the scorecard, it'll be able to, if you are able to answer one of the questions, it shows you where more information is needed and what kind of information is needed. And then, of course, these questions that are posed in the Bankability Scorecard gives you an understanding of what questions you need to be asking as you, as local governments, design future projects and future ideas. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there's any questions that are coming through, and I will try and answer them and do justice. So I have a question here from Patrick himself, who says, who is to finance the infrastructure? So Patrick, that question is a good one. It's this Bankability Scorecard is not about answering who is to finance. It's answering what finance model you need and how viable your project idea is, and then what information is missing that you need to improve so that your financiers will take your project idea seriously. Post that, you'll get a very good idea of what where your project stands, and then you can get an inch to the next phase, which I know that Africa supports quite a lot, is trying to introduce local governments to those financiers who might be able to finance that project. Hope that answered your question. I see that there is a question that's not necessarily linked to the Bankability Scorecard, but it is aimed at Patrick. So I will open up the floor to more general questions. But Patrick, this one is for you. It is, what is the value of waste to wealth in developing African economy and youth innovation of job creation? And then also, what is the role of non-governmental organizations? Thank you.
Kevin, am I supposed to respond to that? I didn't understand it very well. It seems like it was a general question.
It is a general question. I've opened the floor for general questions and questions on the Bankability Scorecard. So one general question has come through for you, and it's about what is the value of waste to wealth in developing African economy?
Yeah, for me, it speaks broadly on the issue of the circular economy generally, as well as the question. There is when you look through the streams of wealth that can be all the way down to fecal sludge. It's quite an exact proportionality can be a challenge, but innovation for job creation is quite a lot that can be plastic scavengers. There are quite a number of you who are actually collecting all these plastics and making them available. We've actually moved the step further. I think this is the most practical response to the question. Because most of our waste is biodegradable, we've imported into the country flies from South Africa that are able to generate, to produce larvae that is used in the poultry feeds. And the research so far shows that the value that's produced by the soldier flies, it enhances the food, the poultry foods are moving towards that. So
Thank you, Patrick. Again, your internet was coming and going, but
I don't know.
Sorry, Patrick, your internet
Yes,
was
I don't know
coming
that
and
was
going
clear.
there.
My network went off, but it was just a general question.
Yes, thank you. I think we heard enough for that general answer. So thank you very much. We have another general question that's come through. Please don't forget to send through any questions you have on that Bankability Scorecard. I do know I went through it quite fast and it is quite technical. So if you have any questions, please do send it through. But I do see another general question for Brenda, is what is the role of non-government organizations in urban development in Africa in the midst of ethnic diversity and boundaries?
Thank you. Let me try and respond. I think my response is probably going to touch a bit on the previous question as well, and respond to the question posed. The NGOs are increasingly getting involved and becoming very prominent in our municipality. For example, we have a youth group, and I was going to comment in a closing statement about the creativity and the energies that the youth have. A youth group in one of our former township areas that have organized themselves and mobilized themselves. They are voluntarily clearing streams, cleaning up dumping areas, revitalizing open spaces. And through their work, they've actually now partnered with a development foundation. And there is in negotiations with the municipality, with getting an MOU started. So local energies and youth initiatives are actually bearing fruit in where they initially were voluntarily. You probably could in time to come actually start having an economic value to those volunteers as well. Also with regards to, and this touches maybe a bit more on the previous question, if I'm allowed, we have various recycling initiatives underway. And again, it's women and youth that are very involved with obviously glass, paper, and other packaging recycling. But also I mentioned about networking and the IDZ that we have. They are working with a local group called Utando Solutions to establish a glass manufacturing plant as an incubation process, but also again as with recycling as one of the sources of goods or inputs. So there's definitely a lot of potential and projects that are emerging. We've also got a situation in one of our industries, one of the byproducts is gypsum, and we've got, I don't want to say millions of tons of it, but there's so many tons of it stacked in one area. And there's also initiatives underway to looking at the reuse of this. So there's definitely a lot of potential that's been identified, again, not just from the municipality, but private sector and NGOs. And we do see with our waste management flagship project that we've done a feasibility for. We're looking at composting initiatives, looking at organic waste and everything. We also do see involving local communities more specifically. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Again, wonderful insights and very tangible kind of solutions and way forwards. So we're getting to the end of our session. So I wanted to give the floor back over to both our speakers, Patrick and Brenda, to reflect and say one closing remark on building the future now. Maybe Patrick, you want to give one last statement on building the future now?
Thanks. I think I think we are going to three important aspects that I think we need to put into consideration. Number one, we need to bring back our cities on the planned course of urban development. It's dangerous to let our cities sprawl out like headless chicken in all directions, because it's creating a negative impact on other sectors of our national economy, like agriculture, and negatively impacting on the environment. Because as more land is urbanized, people move to the forests. There is just a finite number of people that can be in a given city. Two, it's jobs, it's jobs, it's jobs, and it's jobs. If we cannot have a knock-on effect on supporting productivity of our cities that can create wealth and jobs, we are in a recipe for disaster. Because the second wave is going to be crime and the negative externalities associated to do with congestion. Like if we can learn a lesson from this COVID-19. And lastly, we need to reorganize financing of our cities and authorizing environment. Because if those functionality that's going to hit us is going to be so terrible that urbanization is not going to be managed in many of African cities. I don't want to be a prophet of doom, because the youth are the creative engines. Give them the space, then they can be able to innovate and come up with the new opportunities riding on the backbone of technology. That's where I'll need to rest my case.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for those key points. And over to you, Brenda, your last point about building the future now.
Thank you very much. To start off with, I cannot agree more with Patrick and his comments made. And I'll start off with where he left off on the youth. We started off with smart cities, and let's be honest, the smart city thing comes naturally to the young people. It's just natural for them. They're going to be able to grasp it and run with it. They've got creativity and innovation that's lacking in maybe some of our elder folk. I'm talking about me specifically. And then also, I think apart from the role of the youth, we need to, all the role players need to have a common goal. Through networking and partnerships, we can all do our small little mandates and our little role, but we must have a common goal at the end that we should strive towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very powerful closing words from both Brenda and Patrick. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much to all attendees and of course speakers. We hope that this has provided the inspiration that it was intended. If other African cities are doing it, so can you. And there are two tools to help. So the entire Rise Africa Festival is being run until the 28th of May. So please do go register for other sessions. They really are amazing. It's an incredible lineup. And let Africa rise. Thank you.
Thank you very much.